Good morning, Jonathan. How are you?
I'm very well. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you so much for agreeing to have a chat with me today. The last day of Advocacy Awareness Week, which is really exciting.
Yeah.
It's been a great week because we've seen all about advocacy and we've learned and understand a little bit about where it's come from. But today, really, we're trying to focus on the why we do advocacy. So I'd like to get to know a little bit about your why, if that's okay.
hmm
So let's go back to the start, Jonathan. Before voiceability, can you remember such a time?
Oh gosh, what, the 1840s,
Around then.
1830s? Yeah, gotcha.
So I would love to know when you were a little boy, what was it that you wanted to be when you grew up into an adult?
Well, I really wanted to be a train driver, but that never. Actually, I did get to drive a train once.
Really?
Yeah, I got to drive. I used to share a house with a train driver. So anyway, you don't want to hear that story.
Oh,
Um,
oh, I do. I really do.
I'll see you later. So apart from sort of footballer, train, rock star, couldn't sing at all, not all that good at football, and train driver. I'm not really terribly sure. But I became clearer, I think, you know, as things went on. Grew up with my sister Juliet, who's got learning disabilities and is autistic, and I heard a lot about what happened when people listened to her and when people didn't listen to her. So that was something that kind of featured in my mind quite a lot. Then when I went, started getting involved with people, mixture. I don't think it was volunteering. I think it was just hanging out with family and family friends, but
Mm.
sort of going to clubs for people with learning disabilities, and spent a while when I finished sixth form. I was going to go to work at a special school for a couple of hours a week, which turned into going there 4 days a week for a couple of months or so. And so all of these things sort of helped me see what happened when people were listened to and when people weren't listened to. Then I got a bit of a shocker when I went to university, that I'd started spending time in a long stay hospital for people with learning disabilities. And a bit of the shock was I just did not think that places like that still exist in
Mm.
what was then the 1820s. No, it wasn't the 1820s. It was the 1980s. But even then, it just felt like going back centuries that people would live in conditions like that. And I learned from that also that you could do some really good stuff even in awful sort of traditional settings. Um, I left college. I became a support worker, working with people escaping from a long stay hospital. It's something that was a bit more like their own home, and then started to try and figure out in a different with an NHS employer, how it is that we could start building services that were based on what people really needed, rather than shoving people into services. And then came down to London, as people kind of inevitably did at the time, or I did, and started to work through some of the ideas that we now know as being sort of around individual budgets, personal budgets. Again, trying to put some of the resource, some of the control, some of the cash, the money in the hands of people who use services, or at least sort of closer to people. The next part of the story I'd love to tell is how I saw advocacy and saw that it was brilliant and fabulous, and that was the light, and I came to the light, and the light was great. But I can't tell you that story because it's not true. What instead I saw was somebody that I was concerned about, who it was being proposed that something happened to that was really going to be difficult and dangerous for her, that she'd moved somewhere that I thought posed a huge risk to her, and I had good evidence would be a huge risk to her. And I was worried, but I wasn't that worried because she had an advocate. And I thought, well, advocate. Actually, I was quite scared. The idea of an advocate. They sounded like pretty tough people. And I thought, well, they'll stand up for her. She'll be in good hands. And despite that, I did a lot to try and stop that move happening, including making sure that the person's was lawyered up and all those kinds of stuff. But it happened, and it happened because the advocate did very little. And the advocate's silence was taken as assent. And so what's the problem if the advocate thinks it's okay? And so that convinced me that advocacy done weakly, advocacy done poorly, is not just neutral, it's pretty dangerous for people. And I was rather younger and just that bit more arrogant than I am now, some would say. And so I saw a job going that was running a small advocacy organisation. When I say small, it was probably the largest in the country. It employed 12 people, 7 full-time equivalent members of staff. And so I went and I joined that. So yeah, long story short, that's how I got involved in advocacy. But at the heart of that was trying to figure out, how do people have real choice, control, voice, and decision making in their lives, and how do people have that even when it can be pretty hard to understand what it is that somebody's trying to say, because we're all trying to say something, we just need to listen right to it.
So when you joined that massive organisation of 12 people, what was it? What was it like?
It was exciting. It was there was a lot of folklore about how you did things and how you didn't do things. It was an organisation that was overwhelmingly doing some really great stuff through the volunteers that we supported. There were about 150 volunteers at the time who were one-to-one citizen advocates, taking an interest in the life of somebody else who had a voice that needed to be heard. There was all kinds of folklore about stuff. You mustn't ever write something down because that infringes people's privacy. So it was haphazard. It was a bit chaotic, but really delivered by people who wanted to do good stuff and believed in people's rights, and linked up with a lot of good local volunteers that were brought colour and life and interest to other people's lives.
So with kind of that organisation, how did you choose how to help people? How did you find them? How did you use your limited resources, I guess, to go to those who most needed it?
I think a mixture of good luck and judgment, probably. There would be long waiting lists. Uh, there'd be a shortage of advocates to support people. There'd be relationships that had gone on for a very long time that were hugely valuable in people's lives, and people effectively becoming a part of people's family, and then those people bringing them into to sort of social and community life and just treating them as ordinary people. But there were very few people that got the support that the organisation provided relative to the number of people that needed it. And sometimes that support was misplaced. Actually, people wanted some stuff changing here and now. And so we developed different ways of assisting people, helping people to get together, to have a voice in their own lives. I remember meeting with a bunch of people who were living in a long stay hospital. And the briefing that I've been given by these highly paid consultants was, it's really important to talk about food. Bring some cards and some information about food because people want to talk about food. So rocking up there with one of my colleagues, and we had lots of cards in our bag about food. And I remember the first guy that in the first meeting saying, I don't want to talk about food. I want to talk about the fact that the staff pinned me down and drugged me. And it's like, wow, let's go with what people want to go with. Let's listen to what's important to people. It did turn out later on that people wanted to talk about food. There was a distribution thing. They didn't have a kitchen on the wards. They sort of distributed it centrally. And the food supply was known as cook and chill, but had very, very quickly been known by a lot of the people in the hospital as cook and kill, because they felt it was so disgusting that it was actually going to do their health harm. So we did talk about food as well. The consultants were right in the end.
It's funny that you mentioned then about humour, because that seems it's such a common way of talking and sharing, that common language of finding humour in some of the darkest situations, right?
Yeah, I think so. I always remember a report that was written about how stalemated, how delayed the movement of people from hospital was. And it was a report written long, long time back, and it was called When Eagles Fly.
Hmm.
Yes, why was it called When Eagles Fly? And it was a folklore in one of the hospitals, which is that people would leave the hospital when the eagles flew. Well, eagles fly all the time, not the ones that were on the gatepost of the hospital, because they were made of concrete. So that dark humor of kind of, and the positive side of that is actually the vast majority of people did leave that hospital and did leave other hospitals. The difficult and dark side of it is, of course, there are people who remain, and we need to do something about that.
Absolutely. So you've been involved in kind of the advocacy movement then for a few years. How has it changed in your mind?
I think that some of the radicalism, some of the absolute belief in people's rights, people's voices, that's remained with us. I think what we've managed to do is to tremendously scale up, which sounds sort of very businessy. We've made sure that tens of thousands more people
Mm,
get benefit from it. We've moved from being the hippies in the wood, doing some weird stuff that nobody really understands, to actually being a part of the mainstream of how health and social care, particularly, are delivered. And I think that does come at a price of sort of eternal vigilance, that we don't just become a part of the system, just something that kind of, ticks boxes, that we do genuinely stand alongside people. And I've seen times that we've fallen off that line to the wrong side. I've also seen some hugely powerful examples. Each time I go out with our advocates, I spend time with people in mental health settings or in their own homes or in supported living, and I see people, making sure that person has a powerful voice, not getting
mm,
suckered in to thinking that what the best that's available is the best that can get. So I think it's important that we keep that spark alive of real radicalism in our thought. And it's radical, makes it sound like it's something sort of out there. Actually, what we're saying is pretty basic, which is people should be the authors of their own lives. We should be in charge of our lives. And the fact that we've got dementia, or the fact that we've got a learning disability, we've got mental health needs, that shouldn't stand in the way of that. It's about other people listening, and really listening and responding to people. So I think there's been a huge difference in scale. I think there's
mm,
been some challenges in terms of maintaining our really strong focus. I think there's been a growing sense of standards. Actually, what does good look like? And we need to take that even further. I always remember a colleague who told me when they first joined the organisation, it's like everyone thinks that they've got an advocacy Bible and they know what the truth is and the true way of doing things, but they're all reading a different book. I think we've come together a lot more about what does good look like, and I think we've got a long way further to go to make sure that we really are delivering the best for people always consistently.
Well, that's interesting, because I was going to ask, kind of, we spent some time looking back about the future, and you've achieved so much at VoiceAbility. You really have, and VoiceAbility has grown. Organisation, the advocacy movement has grown. What do you think still is left to be done?
Oh, there's a huge amount still to be done. I think that's, we set ourselves the ambition that everyone has a voice when it matters most in their lives, and yet we know that the vast we know there's a vast number of people that don't, people
Mm,
that aren't involved in their own lives, people who have decisions that are made by other people. So I think there's something about how do we truly reach everyone. And I think there's a few different ways that we can work to do that. I don't think we can do any of it on our own. I think it's about how, as a movement, we grow and change, and how we make sure that there's a really high standard, so that no matter who or where the support is provided, it really helps people transform their lives. I think there's something about how we interact outside of our organisations, because we're never going to reach everyone through employing staff or supporting volunteers. How do we make sure that we all know and understand how to support ourselves and how to support each other? So how do we really become, kind of in a way, go back to our community roots, but go forward and embrace all the new technology and all those other ways that we can genuinely reach people? So I think there's something about standards. I think there's something about reaching everyone. I think there's something about making sure there's a consistently high quality service to people who often get the worst services. So people who often get the worst public services are also at risk of getting poorer advocacy services, and that should be the other way around. So we should be hugely effective in working with people who are minoritized, people whose voices are most marginalized. I think there's a real challenge there. I think we've got to not just make sure that people have a stronger voice, but make sure that the overall system is better at listening and responding. So there's the stuff around how we change policy, but much more importantly than that, how we make sure that that reads through into practice and into people's ordinary lives, so that it's no longer acceptable that decisions are made without the person in the room. It's no longer acceptable that we don't listen to people. And I think there's also a role that we can play as advocacy organisations that's around systemic change. How is it that we reset the standards for provision? I go into too many services for older people, or particularly older people with dementia, that frankly scare me. I do not want someone that I love, and I do not want myself to end up living somewhere like that. We can do better. So I think there's, how do we use the insights, the intelligence, the knowledge, and how do we amplify the voices of people who draw on our services so that we reset standards? So I think, yeah, we've come a long way, but boy, have we got a long way to go.
It's funny though, despite the fact that you've come such a long way, that story that you referenced pre your advocacy career seems to still really hold sway. That need for standards, that need for quality, that making sure that advocates are being the best they can be, and advocacy is the best it can be, or hook back to that time of you seeing when it wasn't.
Yes, I think so. And I think we need to, relentlessly focus on just how well are we listening to people? How strongly are we standing on their side? It's difficult. The job of advocates is really tough.
Mm,
You might be the one person, aside from the person that you're there to support, and their voice may already be being ignored. You may be the one person saying, actually, you know what, this isn't what the person wants. This isn't the best that we can do. And I know that resources are limited, and I know that decisions are hard. But actually, we've got to do better, and that's a tough job that we're asking people to do. And so I think we need to provide people with all the support and all the kudos for the brilliant way in which they do it.
absolutely. When I joined our team, our fabulous learning and development team, kind of reference advocacy is support to help people make the wrong decisions. And I love that. We have the right to get it wrong as humans.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and that's where we differ really from all the professionals and everyone else involved in the system.
Yeah, it's wonderful the way that we've actually got that as a principle that's embedded in our legislation now. I used to use as an example, and it no longer works as an example, the fact that I used to go swimming all year round, including, at one time when there was a thin layer of ice on the surface, swimming outdoors this is. And that is absolutely classically, definitely an unwise decision. Doesn't really work these days now that cold water swimming is seen as sort of healthy and vigorous and everyone does it. I can't do it anymore anyway because I freeze to death. But yeah, that right to make unwise decisions, and actually quite often we find out that unwise decisions aren't really unwise decisions. That it's the person with dementia that says, actually, you know what, I'm not moving out of my own home. And we know that quite often when people do move out of their own homes, actually that wasn't the right thing for them. It's about other people having the courage to back people and provide the right support to help people lead their own lives, even if on the surface they're risky. Sometimes they're less risky than the conservative alternative of, you know, going into care provision and so on. Yeah.
Yeah. Always skating on thin ice, eh, Jonathan? So I have some quick fire questions for you.
Oh no,
I know,
no.
they I'm not going to give you any warning. Okay, right. Are you right-handed or left-handed?
Right.
What's your favorite food?
Oh gosh, that too difficult. Too many things. Hot coconut dal.
Nice. Coffee or tea?
Coffee. Became an addict over the pandemic.
If you had to go anywhere on holiday, where would you go?
Highlands.
Do you have any pet peeves?
Oh, too many to list. Oh, pet peeves. Oh no, too many. I'll just no pass.
Finally, but you can't pass on this. You've used your pass. If you could give your younger self a piece of advice, what would it be?
Don't eat oat bran.
Thank you very much, Jonathan, for your time today and having a conversation with me and to explore why advocacy matters to you. I will see you very soon.
All right, cheers. Bye.